Good evening. We're coming on the air with breaking news from the G7 summit in Charlevoix, Quebec, a gathering that has erupted into a diplomatic crisis. The United States, once the anchor of this alliance, now stands at the center of a storm, challenged not by a rival, but by its closest ally, Canada. Tonight, the usual facade of unity has shattered. Inside sources describe open confrontation, culminating in a moment that will be studied for years. President Trump issued a stark ultimatum to the other leaders, but it was a Canadian response that left the world stunned. This isn't just about trade disputes, it's a fundamental shift in the global order, with the G7's very foundation shaken. The world is watching as the future of America's alliances and the stability they've provided hangs in the balance. The annual G7 summit, a gathering of world leaders from the globe's most powerful economies, commenced with the usual pomp and circumstance. The opening ceremonies featured the customary firm handshakes, a symbolic gesture of unity and mutual respect intended for the cameras and the global audience. Polite smiles were exchanged, and the initial discussions revolved around cooperation on pressing global issues, from climate change to economic stability. But beneath the carefully constructed facade of camaraderie, tensions simmered, threatening to boil over and disrupt the entire summit. The primary source of discord stemmed from President Trump's aggressive trade policies, specifically the imposition of tariffs on steel imports and aluminum, a move that had sent shockwaves through the global market and strained relationships with key allies. These tariffs were directly targeting allies like Canada, a nation with a long-standing history of close economic ties with the United States, and Europe, who viewed the tariffs as a blatant act of protectionism and a betrayal of established trade agreements. European leaders arrived at the summit with a firm resolve to defend the principles of free trade and challenge what they perceived as unfair and discriminatory practices. Undeterred by the criticism, Trump doubled down on his America First agenda, reiterating his commitment to protecting American industries and jobs, regardless of the consequences for other nations. The first day of the summit unfolded in a civil manner, but the atmosphere was undeniably tense, with an undercurrent of unease permeating every discussion. There were pointed discussions and heated debates about the potential damage of protectionism and the importance of maintaining a level playing field in international trade. Trudeau, in his role as host, found himself in a delicate position, attempting to balance the need for diplomatic harmony with the imperative of defending Canadian interests. He was determined to protect Canada's economic security and ensure that its voice was heard amidst the escalating trade disputes. The stage was set for a major confrontation, with the potential for a complete breakdown in negotiations looming large. But no one could have predicted the level of drama that would ultimately unfold, a series of unexpected events that would send shockwaves throughout the international community. Among the attendees was Mark Carney, the highly respected Canadian-born governor of the Bank of England, a key figure in the global financial landscape. He was typically a quiet figure, observing the proceedings from the sidelines, offering his expertise and insights when called upon. He was widely known and admired for his sharp intellect, his deep understanding of economics, and his ability to articulate complex issues with clarity and precision. He preferred to operate behind the scenes, influencing policy through reasoned arguments and data-driven analysis rather than seeking the spotlight. Yet, as the summit progressed and the tensions continued to escalate, it became increasingly clear that even those who typically remained in the background, even background players, the quiet diplomats and financial advisors, could play a pivotal role in shaping the course of events. It was a stark reminder that in moments of crisis, even the most unassuming individuals could rise to the occasion and change the course of history with a single, well-timed intervention. The breaking point came. Tensions had been simmering beneath the surface for days, fueled by disagreements on climate change, trade imbalances, and security commitments. The carefully constructed facade of unity was beginning to crack, revealing deep divisions within the alliance. It was during a closed-door session on the final day, a last-ditch effort to salvage a joint statement, that the situation reached a critical juncture. Exhaustion and frustration hung heavy in the air, tempers flared as leaders struggled to agree on a joint communiqué. Each nation had its own priorities and red lines, making consensus seem increasingly impossible. The debate grew heated, voices were raised, and the room buzzed with nervous energy. Frustrated by the lack of progress, President Trump interrupted, his patience wearing thin. He had come to the summit with a clear agenda, and he was determined to see it through. He issued an ultimatum, a stark challenge to the very foundation of the alliance. He demanded that they accept his terms on trade, a set of concessions that would significantly benefit the United States. He stated that if they didn't comply, the U.S. would walk away from the agreement and escalate tariffs on goods from their countries. The threat was clear, a trade war with America's closest allies, a move that could destabilize the global economy. It was a high-stakes gamble, a test of wills with potentially devastating consequences. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. The other leaders were visibly stunned by the audacity of the demand, the bluntness of the approach. They exchanged glances, searching for a sign of what to do next. Trump treated the G7 as a boardroom, a place for hard-nosed negotiations and uncompromising demands. He was expecting compliance, a swift and decisive agreement to his terms. He believed America's economic power would force the others to yield, to accept his demands rather than risk economic isolation. The silence was thick, heavy with unspoken words and simmering resentment. The alliance's future was hanging on the next words, the next actions of these powerful leaders. Would the G7 bend to U.S. pressure, sacrificing their own interests to maintain the alliance? Or would they stand firm, risking a trade war and a potential fracturing of the established world order? The moment demanded a response, a display of leadership that would resonate far beyond the walls of that room, a response that could redefine the Western alliance, shaping its future for decades to come. The world's most powerful leaders waited, each contemplating the gravity of the situation and the potential consequences of their decision. They knew history was being made, that this summit would be remembered as a turning point in international relations, the stakes, nothing less than the future of unity or fracture. The choice was theirs. The next move would set the tone for global cooperation for years to come, or conflict, ushering in an era of uncertainty and instability. The silence in the room was electric, leaders weighing the cost of defiance versus capitulation. Trump mistook their hesitation for victory, convinced his ultimatum would force compliance. But the silence was not submission, it was calculation. The old rules no longer applied. The U.S. was demanding fealty, not partnership. Trudeau, as host, was expected to respond, his calm masking a furious internal debate. Would he seek compromise or defend the alliance's principles and risk Trump's wrath? The world watched, waiting for Canada's answer. The next words would define not just the summit, but the future of global alliances. The pressure was immense, the consequences far-reaching. In that moment, the G7's fate and perhaps the world's hung in the balance. The tension in the room was palpable. World leaders gathered at the G7 summit braced themselves as Trudeau prepared to address the assembly. The weight of global expectations rested on his shoulders, but an unexpected intervention was about to steal the scene. Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of Canada, a figure known for his economic acumen and steady hand, broke the silence. His presence commanded respect and his words carried the weight of financial authority. Calm and measured, his voice resonated with a quiet confidence that cut through the political posturing. He was about to deliver a message that would challenge the prevailing narrative. Carney addressed Trump directly, bypassing the usual diplomatic niceties. His gaze was unwavering, his tone firm but respectful. He was not there to engage in political sparring, but to present a stark warning. Not with political rhetoric or personal attacks, but with the cold hard facts of economic reality. He intended to speak the language that even the most ardent protectionist could understand, the language of numbers. Mr. President, Carney began, we've run the models. We've analyzed the data from every conceivable angle, and the results are undeniable. A trade war, he stated with unwavering conviction, would be catastrophic for all nations involved, disrupting global supply chains and stifling economic growth. The consequences would be far-reaching and devastating, but the U.S., he emphasized, would suffer the most significant and long-lasting damage. The American economy, so reliant on global trade, would be particularly vulnerable to the fallout. He detailed the intricate and deep integration of U.S.-Canadian supply chains, highlighting the seamless flow of goods and services across the border. He explained how tariffs would disrupt this vital artery of commerce, and warned that financial markets, ever sensitive to uncertainty and risk, would react harshly and swiftly to any signs of American isolationism. Investors would flee, and the stock market would plummet. Impose your tariffs if you must, Carney declared, his voice resonating with a steely resolve, but be prepared to face the consequences. The G6, he asserted, would move forward, forging new alliances and trade agreements without the United States. The world would not wait for America to change its mind. The global economy, resilient and adaptable, would adjust to the new reality, finding alternative routes and partners. The world will adapt, but the U.S., Carney concluded, would ultimately pay the steepest price for its unilateral actions, facing economic stagnation and diminished global influence. Carney's words were not a plea for compromise or a negotiation tactic, but a stark warning grounded in irrefutable data and rigorous economic analysis. He presented a clear and compelling case, leaving no room for doubt. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably, the weight of Carney's words settling upon the assembled leaders. From initial shock and disbelief to a growing sense of awe and grudging respect for the central banker's audacity. As a technocrat armed with facts and figures, not a politician driven by ideology or personal ambition, checkmated the president, exposing the flaws in his economic strategy with surgical precision. The perceived threat of unchecked American dominance, fueled by protectionist policies, was met not with political resistance, but with the cold, dispassionate logic of global finance, a force that transcended national borders and political ideologies. Carney's intervention fundamentally reframed the debate, shifting the focus from political grandstanding to tangible economic consequences. This was no longer about national pride or political posturing, but about the real-world impact on jobs, businesses, and the global economy. The assembled leaders, initially stunned by Carney's bold move, began to see a new path forward, one that didn't necessarily require the approval or participation of the United States, a path towards a more multilateral and cooperative global order. The silence that followed Carney's address was not one of defeat, but one of profound realization and strategic recalculation. The delicate balance of power within the G7, and perhaps the global order itself, had subtly but irrevocably shifted. The G7, once a symbol of American leadership, would never be quite the same, forever marked by Carney's audacious intervention. The world had witnessed a pivotal turning point, a moment where economic pragmatism challenged political dogma, and the future of global cooperation hung in the balance. Inside the room, Carney's intervention was met with stunned admiration. European leaders searching for a counter to Trump found it in Carney's data-driven rebuke. News of the confrontation spread rapidly, dominating headlines worldwide. The narrative, a quiet Canadian banker had stood up to the American president, and won with facts, not bluster. Financial markets wobbled, but Carney's assurance steadied nerves. The world would move on, even if the U.S. chose isolation. The G6 was ready to act, signaling that global cooperation could survive without American leadership. Social media exploded with support for Canada's stance, and editorials praised the principled stand. Canada's image transformed, from polite neighbor to assertive global leader. The summit became a symbol of resistance to go-it-alone nationalism. In a single moment, the world saw that alliances could endure, even in the face of American threats. This summit drama isn't just about foreign policy, it hits home for every American. The G7 sets the rules for the global economy. When those rules break, Americans pay the price. A trade war with allies means higher prices, lost jobs, and shrinking markets for U.S. businesses. Carney's warning was clear: America's prosperity depends on cooperation, not isolation. If the U.S. pushes allies away, it risks losing influence and economic strength. The world is moving on, forming new alliances that could leave America behind. This is a wake-up call. Leadership means partnership, not just power. The G7 clash forces us to ask, what kind of role should America play in the world? The summit's aftermath was icy. Trump left early, attacked Trudeau, and withdrew from the joint statement. The U.S.-Canada relationship, once defined by trust, hit a historic low. Trade talks grew tense, and cooperation on key issues faltered. Canada began seeking new partners, realizing it could no longer rely solely on the U.S. The confrontation sparked a surge of national pride and a new assertiveness in Canada. This wasn't anti-Americanism, but a declaration of sovereignty. Repairing the relationship will take time and trust. The easy partnership of the past is gone. A more cautious, transactional era has begun. The G7 summit marked the end of innocence for North America's closest allies. The Charlevoix summit's impact extends far beyond North America. The G7 showdown signaled that America's leadership can no longer be taken for granted. Allies are preparing for a world where they must rely on each other. Not just the U.S. Carney's G6 remark captured a new reality. Global cooperation will continue, with or without Washington. This shift brings risks, fragmentation, instability, but also opportunities for more balanced leadership. The summit was an inflection point. The post-Cold War order was challenged by America's own friends. The world is watching how the US will respond. Will it rebuild trust, or retreat further? The answer will shape the century ahead.